Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our discussion on the electrified future. Today, we'll spend an hour-long session talking about the future of electricity and the energy market in New York State and in general, featuring a startup, a corporate, and of course, our very own Satish Rao, who will lead the discussion. My name is Omri. I'm part of the NewLab team and the program manager for our 5G studio. As many of you might be familiar with our work at NewLab, but some of you are not. We are happy to have you. And for those of you who are not familiar with NewLab, I'll give a very quick introduction before I hand it to Satish to lead this conversation. We are a community of experts and innovators applying transformative technology to the world's biggest problems and challenges. NewLab membership and studio bring together entrepreneurs, engineers, innovators, and industry leaders to create sustainable solutions and enterprises. NewLab employs technologies including robotics, AI, and material science to transform what matters the most: health, environment, media, cities, and infrastructure. Before we get going, a couple of housekeeping notes. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. We encourage you to submit your questions through there. Satish and I would review those questions and would answer and share them with the panel for the discussion. Feel free, please, to share those as the conversation goes, and we'll make sure to incorporate them in the discussion. Again, we are excited to have you here, and without further ado, I would like to pass it to Satish.
Thanks, Omri. Appreciate the introductions. Yes, I'm Satish Rao, I'm NewLab's Chief Product Officer, and it's our department that manages all of NewLab's industry and government engagements, where we leveraged our platform that we call the Innovation Studio. Here's a great photo of our space located here in Brooklyn, New York. This is HQ of NewLab, where we're home to about 200 what we call member companies. These are frontier technology focused startups, artists, and designers that work together in this collaborative space to really build products and solutions that are really changing the world. One of the unique things about NewLab that we'll talk about a bit more that's relevant to this topic is this access to the location in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So we really are in this open sort of living and thriving innovation testbed that's been used quite often by not only our entrepreneurs, but many of our industry and government partners as well. And so this is a nice shot of where NewLab's located and sort of the surrounding areas that we use quite often to test a lot of our solutions. But more broadly, like how do we deliver value? Is we basically work with communities of startups and for entrepreneurs, as well as industries and government partners to solve a variety of challenges and sort of realizing growth opportunities that can affect not only industry sectors, but also communities. And we do this across 4 integrated business units that we call, that you can see here. Our innovation studios, which are programmatic platforms that identify solutions in the world of entrepreneurs and focus them towards the problem sets that are generated by industry and government partners. We'll talk a bit more about the sectors we work in there. We support membership, so a community of 200 plus entrepreneurs, about 900 individuals that have access to our NewLab building, working across a variety of sectors and ranging across a variety of levels of maturity. We also have a venture studio where we launch new companies. So increasingly, we work with founders, serial entrepreneurs, first-time founders that want to come to NewLab and work with us and our team in sort of launching their next company, leveraging not only our ability to lead and to be a co-founder, but also our support when it comes to things like marketing and finance and operations. Of course, again, access to the space. And then finally, our investments, increasingly becoming an active investor through a large angel network, where we're able to source some great deals, not only through our membership, but also through our studios in areas that are of quite interest to a variety of investment communities. As a glance, just to give you a sense of the sort of the volume that we're working under here, again, 200 plus companies, growing valuation across the portfolio, high occupancy post-COVID lockdown, which has been really, we're very proud of. Basically, these entrepreneurs need to be able to build. And so as soon as we were able to open the doors back up, a variety of companies came back, more new ones came, and plenty seem to grow now in 2021. So we've been really, it's been a pleasure to come to NewLab every day and just see the space back in its full sort of capability. On the Innovation Studios, we work across a variety of verticals and also a variety of diverse partners, known entities in terms of large corporations and enterprises such as Verizon and Ford, who you will hear from today from our panelists, as well as civic-focused communities and governments such as New York City. We work in the field of mining. We work with Department of Defense as well. And what's been interesting, which is relevant to this webinar, is that all of these studios we worked on have had a significant amount of topics focused on the energy transition. And so what we have a unique position, I think, at New Lab is sort of seeing the lens from our partners in terms of how they view this future state of energy. How does New York City look at this transition? How is someone like a Verizon or Ford reacting to this new world of electrification? What do we need to do if we're in Ørsted to deliver new capacity? What does the Department of Defense have to think about? How about mining, who's supplying the critical metals that we need to electrify our systems? And so it's been an interesting kind of vantage point to see that trend towards these topics of energy. And some of those topics we'll dive in on today. As an example of some of the work we've done in energy and who you'll hear from today's is examples of some of the pilots we've done through our studios. And so here is an example of Fermata Energy, who represented by John Wheeler today in the panel, who was part of our 5G studio and tested their bidirectional charger in our courtyard here at New Lab and how it could interact not with just charging the car that it's plugged into, but also the New Lab building. And so how do you balance load between car and building to create new value for the asset owner, which is not just the building, but also the person that owns the EV car? And how do you amplify that if you connect it through something high speed like 5G? And so there's a variety of technical solutions that we're able to sort of validate and prove, but it also showed data that showed the interesting business model and value creation that a device like this can do, not just for car owners, but also communities that these chargers are part of. Sapient Industries was another start we worked with through our Circular City program funded by the New York City Economic Development Corporation, using these sensors to basically manage building load and efficiency. And so huge gains for New Lab in the building itself in terms of just simple things like turning off the TVs in the conference rooms. And so you really can get quite introspective if you have access to data like this. And so Sapient Industry really provides a unique way to sort of look inside yourself as a building owner and where you can make significant energy efficiency gains. So we're going to dive into some more of those topics. And so I want to take a chance to introduce the panelists and give them a chance to introduce themselves briefly. So we'll start with Steve Christian from Verizon. And you're on mute, Christian. Steve, you're on mute.
That better.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Muted myself twice. All right. Yeah, so hey all, I'll be quick. Product manager / strategist at working with Verizon's new business incubation group. Happy to be here to talk about energy. And but my background is really in software and consumer products, and just have a focus and passion on sustainability. It's nice to see everybody.
Awesome, thanks, Steve. And next, I'd like to introduce John Wheeler, co-founder of Fermata Energy.
Hi, how's it going? I'm John, co-founder of Fermata Energy. We are a vehicle-to-grid company, which basically means we take EVs when they're parked and turn them into mini power plants. So that means we provide technology that lets the car charge normally, just like a normal charger, a normal charging system. But with ours, you can also discharge your EV into your home, for example, if you lose power, or into a building to reduce energy costs and the power of the building, or into the grid to support renewable energy and a variety of things. Or you could really discharge it to any piece of critical infrastructure. That concept is called vehicle to grid or vehicle to X, as we like to call it, meaning the X could be anything. It could be a home, house, or building.
Great, John, thank you. And next, Rebecca Isakovitz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Isakovitz. Previously, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Energy Operations with DCAS, which is the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, now with the state of New York, and excited to talk more about what municipalities are doing in this area. Thanks.
Awesome. And finally, Dave Hearst from Ford's EV team.
Everyone, thanks for having me. So I am part of the energy services group within the EV team, and that puts me, I'm standing in two worlds there. So I do a lot of work on the utility side, working with utilities to understand impact and help manage charging for vehicles with utilities. And then on the other side, on public charging, doing a lot of kind of the business relationships around public charging. And excited to be here.
Amazing. Great. So we've got a lot of interest in this webinar, by the way, one of our highest registration numbers of the year, and a lot of great attendance today. So I think obviously this is a topic that touches on a variety of industries, sectors, and communities, which is what's represented, I think, quite well in the panel here. So Rebecca, we're going to start with you. I'd love to, Cody, put up the prompt that we have here. So I just did some casual reading last night and pulled some quotes that I saw from reports, and this came from a report that I saw that just said a nice statement. Cities are basically aggregators of energy demand. So I'm going to turn to Rebecca first, and just use that as a prompt to kind of understand, maybe from the New York City perspective, but certainly as you apply it to other cities across the world, is what are the opportunities, the immediate opportunities that come to mind when it comes, let's say, for New York City and renewable energy and distributed energy? Let's start with that.
Sure, thanks, Satish. So, I mean, I think New York City is not unique in the sense that municipalities across the nation are recognizing more than ever that power infrastructure and resiliency really go hand in hand. Obviously, Superstorm Sandy hit New York very hard, and we realized what resiliency could mean. And what a resilient power grid could mean. But I think even more recently, Hurricane Ida really spoke to folks in the 5 boroughs and upstate, how risky it is to push off maintaining our power grids and really ensuring that they're sufficient and in satisfactory states of good repair for what our population needs. So. For New York City, there's a number of opportunities that are being advanced. There's certainly a very large photovoltaic initiative that DCAS is managing. It's a 100 megawatt solar goal that really precedes what the state now has as part of the CLCPA, and Governor Hochul just recently upscoped photovoltaic across the state from 6 gigawatts to 10 gigawatts. Of course, there is a very large offshore wind push happening right now by the state, but there's also pretty extensive North Country land-based wind generation that's helping to push power into the state. And then I think the city is really understanding more and more that clean, renewable sources of power coming into the grid, coming into Zone J, which is New York City, realistically, are pretty important. Hydro-Quebec and the city just advanced the a voltage line down from Montreal that will be powering the city. And all these things aggregated together are really looking forward. I think the bigger question, though, is while DCAS is working, the mayor's office is working on behalf of the city. Governor Hochul, of course, is working on behalf of the state. What's happening kind of more locally, what's going on with NYCHA, who is putting out an RFP for decarbonize opportunities across their portfolio. What's HPD doing more locally with all of their folks in landlords across the city. So I think, overall, government is really looking to strategize and look forward. An interesting point here, not only is that kind of state of good repair, but also how do you ensure that government is working together? The mayor's office is working with the Department of Buildings to ensure that as we look to site all of this renewable in city, that the folks who are interested in putting PV on their roofs or interested in doing something innovative don't have the kinds of roadblocks that they've historically had. On the statewide level, the Office of Renewable Siting is doing the same. And then, of course, kind of broad scale, as we look to think about how can we ensure that we're keeping pace, that the city's keeping pace, municipalities across the country can keep pace. This infrastructure bill that was just signed, I think, is going to be a really key part to ensuring that the dollars flowing into the cities are being well utilized, because we know that the projects are there for sure.
Well, and you mentioned, resiliency is certainly a headwind as a reason to push these initiatives that you just mentioned. But if the energy transition is coming to a place like New York, maybe you can, what comes to mind in terms of one or two headwinds that the city is going to be facing as it tries to go through an energy transition in a way that's, beneficial to everyone in the city? And I'll now be a way to tee into the other folks on the panel, because of course they're providing some of the solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a number of opportunities that the New York City has really leaned into. I think the almost more innovative opportunity is really, how do you get everyone to work together so all the cats are being herded in the same direction? That is really the most difficult piece of the puzzle in many ways. The technology is almost easy. It's the long-term maintenance deferring, and it's the getting everyone to kind of walk in the same direction that I think is really the New York City's doing that really well. And is taking kind of some of those best lessons learned and looking to replicate them or help support other municipalities in replicating those successes. It's easy really to rattle off technology, and the other folks on the panel, I think, could do that better than I could. But the reality is that if government isn't working with itself, it's going to be difficult for technology to sprout and seed. And we're seeing that flourishing in the city of New York because of that working together.
Right, and Steve, Rebecca keyed on some topics there. I'm hearing maintenance. I'm hearing being able to operationalize some of these initiatives at the city level, controlling a variety of assets, a portfolio of assets. It's I think turning to you next in terms of Verizon's view of this. I'd love to hear your opinion. Like, how are you looking at this in terms of a perspective of a city trying to go through an energy transition, have to manage all of these assets?
Yeah, well, it's really underlying that a lot of the problems that we're going to have to face in the near future is through generation and distribution. Like these two issues will become much bigger as we become more renewable. So from the past, we've heard a lot about energy demand has always been the problem. Demand response, turn off your lights, unplug your devices not in use, and that will fix some of the issues that we'll have with reliability and sustainability. That is a problem, and it can be a problem. But the demand problem, as we see it, is just not going to go away with the movement of renewable resources. And it's really only going to get worse because it's human nature. We're always going to be demanding more. And so really, as people do their part to buy like electric lawnmowers, vehicles, buses, manufacturing equipment, demand for electricity will increase. And then in such, it'll put a strain on the grid, which is also trying to switch from a more diversified portfolio right now of including carbon-based fuels, which in many cases have greater than 50% of electricity generation in some regions, to less dispatchable or controllable renewable energy sources. And so we've been seeing a lot of this and talking with other companies that they want to purchase like electrical fleet vehicles, install new electrical equipment, but this isn't going to decrease that demand, right? And on the energy grid, and why should it? Why would it be a problem if what we were doing is the responsible thing and we're actually using renewable energy? So that's where the problem that I see coming in, or we've been seeing coming in, and utilities are doing what they can to generate, transport large amounts of renewable energy from solar fields, wind farms, et cetera. But they will face an enormous hurdle getting it down to the actual users. So getting it all the way through their distribution networks, getting with that predicted economy that we'll have that require more energy through electricity. And public and private sectors obviously are going to continue to invest in those low cost and renewable resources, new buses, new everything. In order to keep up with that demand, in order to kind of corral all of those cats, if you want to think of it that way, it'll just become even more of a major challenge as things go further.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like some of those gains or some of those efficiencies that you're pointing at can be implemented likely at an infrastructure level. So that's a great segue to Dave, and then definitely John as well. I think John and Dave both have points of view on these and probably are pretty aligned. But Dave, to you, in terms of commercial EV fleets, certainly driving potentially part of that demand, but as well as being involved in the EV infrastructure, they help mitigate that demand as well and sort of make it sort of beneficial to all that are part of that. What are you working on? What do you see as an opportunity? What do you see as a headwind when it comes, let's say, to the infrastructure side of what drives demand in the city?
Yeah, I think certainly, there's a couple things to think about in this. One is a social equity question of, as we're building all this stuff out, are we making sure to include kind of the, lower income areas, that sort of thing. We can't have EVs be only a product for the wealthy. And I think, you've seen that reflected in the products that Ford's got coming out. And then as you look at the fleet, and building out, depots and those sorts of things, certainly Ford is working on solutions to help fleets kind of strategize around this so that they're not, spending money on either stranded assets or, spending more than they need to build out these fleets. And so you see a lot of work going into managing charging, and whether that's on a fleet side, so you're managing charging between fleet vehicles, so you only need a certain number of chargers in order to accommodate specific use cases within that fleet, or managing charging for customers when they're at home and helping to provide them extra incentives, those sorts of things based on that. Like all of that is stuff that's being worked out. And I think that again comes back to the fact that once the renewables are in place, the actual production of energy is fairly cheap, but getting to that point can be pretty expensive. And we want to make sure that we're still, promoting that and pushing that and not making it, out of reach for kind of everybody that wants to be in the space.
And John, obviously Fermata is coming with a unique solution there. That's part of what Dave just described. I'd love to get your take there.
I'm so glad, Dave, you brought up the energy equity piece, because that is such a huge issue. And as wealth inequality continues at its pace, like it's not going to get better. It's probably going to get worse. And we have to be careful that not all this wonderful technology and all this public investment goes to people with 2 Teslas or 2 Lucid Airs. Now, don't get me wrong, I would love to be one of those people with 2 Lucid Airs or Teslas. That would be great. Or I'll get my fully tricked out Mach-E and F-150. That's what I really want. But meanwhile, there's folks who can't afford any public transportation right now, let alone an EV. And now with COVID, maybe they're immune compromised and they can't take public transportation. And that's a big issue. And it's one of the things that our company is trying to do. Our whole mission is to kind of utilize an electric vehicle in a different way when it's parked, which cars actually are parked most of the time, to provide energy storage services that can effectively reduce the cost of ownership for these EVs, so that they can actually end up costing far less than internal combustion equivalent, and so that everybody can afford this wonderful technology.
I think it's a great segue to the next topic. That was great. That was a great sort of kind of high level view from city down to like how we need to sort of benefit communities and sort of the folks that will be part of the demand of this energy in the future. So Cody, I'd love to put the next prompt up. So this was coming from a World Economic Forum report that I read, and I just sort of paraphrased one line. Access to energy is a basic human need, right? And so in today's world, I think we certainly treat water that way, but energy is more like a benefit in terms of how access we have to it, how much we pay for it, and so on. And so you can argue in a future energy state, this is what we're going to get to, is that we're treating energy as a basic human need, which means that there's opportunities to benefit for everyone that's connected to the grid, through the infrastructure, through EV chargers that own the batteries in their cars, and so on. And so Rebecca, back to you. Coming from your work in New York, and just from in general, in terms of just policy and regulations, what are 1 or 2 things that you think, from let's say a policy perspective, are important to focus on to ensure this sort of equitable access that John and Dave and Steve are sort of touching on to energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not even going to say I won't even say that's a good question. I think it's an incredibly core question. Policy needs to reflect the diverse communities we serve. And that's not just a question of energy or, sustainability, resiliency. It's just full scale, full stop. Policy needs to reflect our diverse communities in a better and more functional way. Environmental justice questions are certainly, questions of equity and environmental justice are certainly questions that I think are core to my work as a public servant. I think most of the people that I work with, I think the same way. I think the easy answer is, policies around, peaker plants, policies around, there's a big movement now around reunification of communities and capping highways. I think, capping the Cross Bronx has really picked up a lot of good momentum in a positive way. These policies are looking to rectify really what is systemic injustice for quite a long time. But it's only through long-term action that we're going to be able to try to rework some of the wrong that has been done, or if not all of the wrong that's been done. I think oftentimes we talk about having a seat at the table. I don't think access is really enough. It's really having diverse communities and communities of color really drive the conversation around where policy goes and being responsive to those needs and not assuming the answer before we've heard the question. I think the Climate Justice Working Group, as part of the CLCPA, has really done a good job of this, of really having grassroots and folks who are on the ground drive the conversation around directionality for the state writ large. I think Circular City, New Lab's partnership with NYCEDC, really does an excellent job of this, of really asking those questions of how do you make a city more equitable. So I think, you can really talk about this for quite a long time. I want to be cognizant of time, but I think the reality is that as we think more and more about what is environmental and economic and energy justice, and what policy really can do to benefit constituencies, having that lens of equity drive the conversation is the most necessary facet of the conversation.
Great. And so John, let me turn to you then. We've got the policy, but we also need the tools, right? So we're moving into this world of distributed energy. Tell me, in your world, from the view of the EV charger, the vehicle connecting to buildings and storage, like how do you see your product playing that role of equitable energy access?
Sure. So, the whole mission of the company was to do two things: was to get more renewable energy on the grid and more EVs on the road. And what's holding back on the grid is kind of the cost of the stationary storage. What's holding back EVs is really the cost of EVs. It's, range anxiety is getting solved with larger batteries and charging corridors. And really the cost of the EVs is such a huge issue with equity as well. And what we're trying to do is, take those EVs, which again are parked 95% of the time, which is an interesting statistic, but it's true if you think about it, and have those be able to provide the energy storage that the grid desperately needs. And if you can do that, you can start paying down the cost of ownership of the vehicle, and then enable access and not only grow EV adoption, but make it so that everybody can have one. And while you're doing that, you're also going to be providing more storage for the grid, so you're helping ramp up renewable energy. And that's kind of the whole point of what we're doing. And an interesting fact, I just want to get this in real quick. I'm going to sound like a Ford commercial here, but I'm not getting paid directly by Ford, just letting you know. What's really interesting about the F-150, which is really a remarkable vehicle, are two things. And this is really relevant for our company. One, it's got a gigantic battery. It's about twice the size of a normal EV battery right now. And if you compare that to a home energy storage system that costs around $8,000, there's probably 10 or 12 of those systems equivalent on board one of those pickup trucks. That's like $80,000 of cash sitting on the hood of the vehicle. So in many ways, that vehicle, if you utilize that energy storage capacity, becomes incredibly affordable for people. The second point is that Ford sells a lot of pickup trucks a year. They sell 500,000. That's a pickup truck every 30 seconds. By the time I'm done ranting, they'll sell like 2 or 3 pickup trucks. If those were the F-150 Lightning, in 1 year, Ford is going to be deploying more energy storage capacity, 22 times the energy storage capacity of the entire stationary storage industry that exists today. That's every single stationary energy storage battery in a home, utility scale, commercial that's been deployed in the past 2 decades. Ford is going to be deploying the equivalent of that every year by a single product if those sales of the F-150 are electric. So that's a moonshot technology that is coming, that's here today. It's not 10 years away. It's a moonshot, 20x here today that's coming, regardless of whether or not people utilize it.
So Dave, I think that's an obvious segue to you. Yeah. But I'm gonna tune that one. First of all, of course, feel free to respond to that. I think you should. And then the second is, I'd love to sort of add on to that, not just individuals, but now when you talk about F-150, we're also speaking about small businesses, right? And the equitable sort of opportunity for businesses to thrive if they have access, if they can leverage EV infrastructure and EV trucks, for example. So I'd love to get your take on how you're looking at that.
Sure. So one thing, we sell a bit more F-150s than that overall, but that's okay. I won't quibble. And while I would love them to all be electric, I think we're a little ways off from selling all electric, all of our F-150s being electric. But either way, a couple things on that. You know, one thing just before I get into your questions, Satish, that made me ponder this. You know, Rebecca, you mentioned environmental justice, and I think there's a real opportunity here to be able to take advantage of both the energy justice as well as, if that's a phrase, as well as the environmental justice, because with all these connected vehicles now, you can do more renewable following and that sort of thing. So you're charging at times when it's best for the environment to be charging as well. So I just wanted to make sure and comment on that. As far as making, you know, vehicles, and I think I'm paraphrasing here, Satish, but I think, you know, making vehicles affordable for small fleets and those sorts of things with the
or just what other new opportunities they're able to generate from going from fleets currently today to fleets of EVs, you know, like what that looks like to you. Yeah. Yeah,
sure. So, you know, some of the certainly the you know, being able to claim more kind of the sustainability side, you know, if you're able to follow renewable charging such that you're charging with more renewables, there's a lot of companies that have sustainability goals around that. You know, we've talked about the Pro Power on Board. That's you know, part of our current F-150, and will be part of the rest of it. That you know, you can actually use power when you're at a work site, those sorts of things. And so I think it opens a lot of kind of you know, new opportunities for these businesses to take advantage of both the environmental aspect of it, as well as kind of the new capabilities that you get with that as well.
And part of that, you know, there's a question that just kind of that came in here, like in terms of the mandate for buildings and businesses to have this EV infrastructure in place to support everything we just talked about. Is that a mandate, or do you think it'll be an incentive? You know, maybe Dave, I'll start with you and I'll turn to Steve on that question.
I think it's going to vary. It's going to depend on where you are. You know, we're seeing some mandates in Europe and things, and I know there's a lot of U.S. cities that are looking at that. But I think it's going to be a, you know, to some degree, I think it's going to be a quality of life issue where, you know, having access to charging and that sort of thing is going to be more, you know, what people are looking for. So I think it'll follow through that as well. So I think it's going to be a mixture depending on where you are.
Steve, what do you think? I'd love to get your take on just directly connectivity as well. Clearly that's a point of view of MBI and Verizon. So, but first, like just in general, the mandate of EV infrastructure versus the incentive?
Well, look, I think in terms of demand, I mean, it's going to be based on the consumer market. There are going to be incentives, obviously, to go electric, but I also believe that people are going to make choices based on their internal goals and internal needs. And some people, a lot of people, actually look at sustainability and climate change as a very real thing, and they will go out and buy items or technology that we're talking about here. And I think what's powerful and what Don and others are doing is they're taking that technology and trying to use it to better equity across multiple people. So it's not just for that one F-150 owner, the Lightning, which is really cool. But I'm not going to continue to talk about it. But they allow they will allow for sharing of more energy and also storing of energy for periods of time where then you can use it later. So I think it's most people are going to still get their energy by plugging into a wall. And so really helping the grid is going to be something that helps the region and makes it equitable access to energy possible. And so I think continuing back to my first statement, distribution is going to be a key challenge and hurdle to overcome. I think EVs it's a huge advancement into what we can look into, especially with the bidirectional charging piece.
Sorry, go ahead, Rebecca. Go ahead.
I'll just say two things really quickly. The first is that as part of the most recent code change in the city, there is a mandate that for major renovation or new construction, that there's a certain amount, if parking spaces are affiliated with the site, that there is a mandatory amount of EVs affiliated with that building. I think the point that Steve had just brought up around equity, the question really is, instead of thinking about EVs as individual assets, right, that people or corporations own, right, how are you mitigating or pushing energy into back and forth from the building into what are portable batteries, right? How are you pushing and pulling that power into the building so that you're mitigating the impact of whatever you're electrifying in buildings, that impact on the grid? I think that's really, right, the more like the core piece here as we look to mandate more spaces, more building spaces or parking spaces or even street spaces having EV potential. How are you pushing and pulling energy through the grid so that you are lessening that impact of whatever you're decarbonizing in your stationary assets?
So that's a lot of, that's electrons moving back and forth, right, between grid to the charger from the source or wherever it may be. So Steve, back to you. Like those are challenges that everyone here is addressing. What are you working on in terms of that sort of overall challenge of moving energy in an efficient way across these systems?
Yeah, well, right now through New Lab and 5G Studios, we're really trying to enable access to 5G for companies like Fermata to come in and really take that on and understand what kind of scale can we produce with 5G and with our nationwide network, right? We believe that 5G is going to be a key to our energy future. And I think when we've been working with companies like Fermata, we've really seen a lot of gains and a lot of positioning towards that. In order to move electrons, they can move without us. Like the electrical system predates computers in the most simple forms. So what we really plan to do is to help transfer this data back and forth, provide that network so you can hit these distributed systems, because that's what we're talking about, a mass distribution of energy providers and consumers. And being able to share this data back and forth in a split second, because electricity is at the speed of light, that's something where I think Verizon can provide a good foundation for a lot of these teams to come in, test it out, and provide really high quality products that that can help with equity, but then also help consumers.
So Dave, when you hear that in terms of sort of an advancement on the connectivity side, how does that inspire or help you in terms of what you're trying to build it forward?
Yeah, I think, certainly one aspect of it is that we are working with utilities, at least initially, on what we call V1G, which is just basically things like demand response, managing to dynamic price schedules, those sorts of things. And all of that requires connectivity, both from the utility back to the Ford or the OEM, as well as down to the vehicle. So it's really a critical piece to be able to make sure that the communication is kind of happening between all of them, and that we're all speaking the same language. And so Ford is part of something called the Open Vehicle Grid Integration Platform, which is it's basically a platform that solves kind of the many-to-many problem. You've got a number of utilities. They say there's about 3,300 utilities across the U.S. Really, it's probably 200 to 300 that are looking at these types of programs in the very near term. But still, that's 200 or 300. And then you've got multiple OEMs, and so I would, as utilities look at it, or Rebecca and others, as the cities look at it, having one OEM respond to grid signals is helpful, but doesn't solve the whole problem. They really need, as many as they can get from multiple OEMs and those sorts of things. And so this platform provides that kind of communication gateway, if you will, between the two, and then being able to make sure that we've got a reliable connection to vehicles to respond to these signals is also a key piece to that.
Yeah, and I'm picking up on that we're nicely moving to the topic of utilities, and so it seems like the three of you, Dave, John, and Steve, have your own way of sort of helping the grid be smarter, more flexible. There was a comment from the audience that mentioned that a lot of corporations and buildings are just opting out of the grid and coming with their own microgrid solutions. That seems like the other end of the spectrum. Likely the future is a mix of the two. So Rebecca, I want to kind of push this over to the smart grid, and so how that connects to what we're talking about. So let's say from your view, having worked in the city, like what is your sort of dream state when it comes to a grid versus these sort of distributed sources that are managed by local buildings and companies and things like that?
So I'm gonna, this is my personal viewpoint, maybe less so than my professional one, but I do think that having community-based distributed generation is an incredibly vital part of just building better flexibility into our rural power grid. I don't see how we can continue. There's a comment by someone earlier in the panel about how population isn't getting any smaller, the demands on the grid aren't getting any lesser. We need to be able to think about better flexibility. And yes, our grid predates computers, but it was also built for a population that is 100 years. It was 100 years ago at this point. So I think the more obviously we don't want to strand assets. It's important to make sure that we're growing in a way that doesn't create investment without follow through. But if we can place more of these kind of community-based either cogen or other DG opportunities kind of in situ, right, the transition, I think, is going to be less painful over time. It certainly lessens transmission questions and cost problems. And I do think that then you're empowering people in communities to really own their own future, which I think is a really important part of the equity question. From a broader municipal professional perspective, obviously you need everything to advance kind of in a simultaneous way. If not at the actual same time, you really need to move things forward in parallel to create standards that everyone kind of can markedly hit. And you're really looking in a longer term, longer duration way, perhaps than folks at a community scale can. So there definitely is a push and pull. But I think that if there is a framework that community-based decision-making can happen within that is functional from the 10,000 foot view, there's no reason why we shouldn't be advancing that.
No, that's a good take. I'll give a pause if anyone else wants to. I was going to turn to John next. John, what do you think from our perspective? Community-based approach versus central smart grid, a mix of the two. Where does Fermata see the future there? Or where does John see the future there?
You know, I think it really depends on kind of what you mean by a community-based microgrid. I think certainly empowering a community to have more control over their energy is really critical. And certainly there are, places in the country where the power, is being turned off on a regular basis for many communities, which, that kind of brings up the question of, are these regulated monopolies filling up, are they meeting their kind of agreement with society? It's like they get to have a monopoly, but they got to keep the lights on. And the issue is that, unfortunately, climate change is here today. It was here, like probably a decade ago. We just didn't really become aware of it in terms of the actual impacts that are happening, and these events that keep happening, whether it's a storm, Texas is freezing, California's on fire. Now there's a drought, so hydro is going to be impacted. It's that's not the problem. The problem isn't what just happened. It's what's going to happen next year and then the year after that, because it's going to increase in severity and frequency. And so the resilience aspect for communities, they need to often take matters into their own hands, but it can be challenging to get that energy density that a community, even if everyone has solar panels on their house, not everyone's roof is great for solar panels. Maybe it works in the cul-de-sac, but you get to any type of multi-rise building, the energy density that you're required it becomes more difficult to do. Now EVs, I'm just going to shtick here for bidirectionality, is nice because those EVs, while they can be a problem, can also be an asset, right? So you can, you've got these EVs that are going to be having, like 200 kilowatt hours on board most of the time, and most of the time, people aren't going to be driving any more really than they are today. So that really represents an underutilized asset, that energy storage capacity. So they could be providing that energy density that community resilience needs with these increasing events.
Nice. Any other comments there? We got one more topic. Thank you. Okay, Cody, last prompt. All right, pulling it from another report. There's actually there's a lot of reports that in academic journals, and also just sort of reports from people that are kind of experts on the topic, talking about different models for public-private partnership as it sort of pertains to energy. And so there was a comment from the audience that pointed out something that Rebecca had said at the very beginning, that technology is the easier part. I wouldn't say the easier part, but the fact is that they're brilliant, smart people in enterprises advancing technology, and so it's coming is one way to look at it. But really hurting sort of the partnerships required to create the infrastructure and the conditions necessary to make this accessible and useful for people. This is where public-private partnerships are come in. So I just want to put this statement out that public-private partnerships will be the key to sustainable energy for all, and that will be our topic, our last topic here for the webinar. So I'm going to start with Dave, just to have heard from you a while. Like in terms of, how OEMs, you talked a bit about this, OEMs engaging utilities. How have you looked at the public side of things, perhaps like at the city or state level, in terms of engagement to kind of move this infrastructure forward that's necessary for everyone to participate?
Sure. So, Ford has a team, the City Solutions team, that has looked at, engages with cities in different ways over time. I think certainly the OVGIP, Open Vehicle Grid Integration Platform that I mentioned, that's specific to utilities. Now, a municipal utility would certainly be welcome to join there. But I think, beyond that, as you start to look at broader energy services, whether it's charging the depots, testing out new technologies, whatever it is, that's where, Ford has a history of being engaged in kind of these private-public partnerships. And so, I think that's where, things like our Michigan Central Station that, we're pulling in not only New Lab, but, other startups and others as well. We work closely with the city of Detroit on that as well. So, I think there's, yes, I mean, we do engage quite a bit. I think it varies, the engagement and the level of engagement varies quite a bit by region. And certainly, as we shift to kind of the bi-directional world, resiliency starts to take a much bigger play as you start to talk to cities, as Rebecca and John have talked about. So, I would anticipate that we'll see a lot more engagement on that front as well. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's clear that there is certainly an agreement that creating this energy state is not, there's no one entity that can do it alone, right? And I think that's what we're seeing from the activity happening out of Ford, Verizon, the proliferation of startups. And so, going back to Rebecca, in terms in your time in New York, what is, maybe you can name one public-private partnership in this world that you felt was, made sense, was inspiring as an example that you can share with the audience?
So I'll caveat before I answer your question, Tish, and say that I think public-private partnerships are an incredible resource to government, and the power that they can bring to the table is not something that anyone should undervalue. But to the point that I had made earlier, the public-public relationship or the public-public partnership is in many ways almost more important than the public-private partnership. And I say that because, Dave just rattled off a couple of things that Ford is doing with a variety of partners across the country. The thing that I realized in my time with the city was that, we are all talking to the same people. Everyone is talking in many ways to different people, and those people on the private side are talking to a variety of public folks. The reality is that if we are all trying to go in the same direction, we need to have conversations and understand who is talking to whom and what those conversations are bringing to bear, because we all have limited dollars. And if we want to stretch our dollars further, realistically, we don't all need to be doing the same thing simultaneously. It's also the frustration to the market, right? Ford talks to Detroit and Cambridge and the city of New York and Miami-Dade region and Cook County, whatever the who is. Those conversations are just, they're reiterating over and over again. Oftentimes you have to start from scratch. We hear this frequently from the private side. People will leave city government or state government, and that the conversation needs to start all over again. If we can work to create better relationships internally from government to government, we really could move the needle much quicker and further, because we know that we could really look at reciprocity opportunities, creating programmatic structures that are less frustrating to the private sector to navigate, figuring out what programming needs to happen from a public-private side and not look to duplicate, reinvent the wheel. So I'll get off my soapbox there because quite a bit of what I did with the city was really trying to break down those internal barriers, because we heard so frequently from private industry that it was just too frustrating to navigate government bureaucracy. And then to kind of most succinctly answer your question, I think when I came into the city, it was during the Bloomberg years. Public-private partnerships were very robust at that point. And I think the most interesting and exciting one that I saw was the work that was happening on Governor's Island. There's the the Oyster Project lives out of Governor's Island. There's a school, a high school on the property that's working in the environmental arena. And there are a variety of partnerships across private industry that are working with the trust, with the high school, with the Billion Oyster Project to really see how, the New York City estuary system can be more sustainable, build a bridge to equitable opportunities, and look to drive opportunities both for the kids who are graduating from the program and also local suppliers, local businesses, and local entities in a way that I think you aren't really seeing kind of a confluence of people in other areas of partnership.
That's great. No, thank you for that. I think the point on collaboration and sort of kind of streamlining that, it is interesting. I think my observations here at New Lab is I don't think I've ever seen more of an openness to collaborate from our corporate and government partners than I have around topics of energy. And I think that's really interesting. I think there's a sort of a sort of community social kind of view of that. There's obviously a business opportunity there as well, and just a general need that we all have to do this together. And so, good point on trying to make that more efficient. I think we can't leave without talking about startups, of course, right? Because we got John here, and of course, New Lab. That's our atomic unit, so to speak, here in our community. And so again, it's another form of collaboration. We think, folks like Fermata Energy have a variety of solutions and sort of views that are really important to move this transition forward, not just the big enterprises on the both government and industry side. So I'll start with Steve first. Certainly you've been working with New Lab. Like, what are you seeing in terms of the opportunity, maybe around the specific to the topics of energy when it comes to engaging startups like John's company?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, well, really, the environment that we have here is great, because nobody can solve these massive challenges like reimagining the future of energy really on our own. Like, we're all excited by the innovation that these startups bring, and really the work done by startups, innovators, and inventors at New Lab through the 5G studios have really created the power to create energy ecosystem of the future. And we believe 5G will be a part of that reimagining of the energy equation. So through smart distributed energy resources, new flexible energy ecosystems, and transforming how we've historically thought about energy and changing it to something that is a value add versus just a cost driver. And how we use that energy, how we generate it, how we better efficiently manage it all. I think that's key to what we're trying to do here. And I think the collaboration that we've had with all these different companies has really helped to put like-minded people together and to talk about these things.
And so, Dave, I wanted to turn to you as well. Same question. Maybe through New Lab, of course, you've engaged small businesses and startups through other channels as well. Where are you seeing the opportunity, sort of the benefit in doing that, especially with energy?
I think Ford, is engaged with a lot of startups kind of across the board. And so, personally, just speaking for myself, I love the energy that comes with that. So it's always exciting to see kind of the passion and how quickly things develop and the pivots that are made and those sorts of things. It's a very, anytime you can bring a startup in, you get a kind of fresh perspective, and it's an exciting playground to be in. And so, I think one of the things that I personally have seen is that without having, I guess if you didn't have access to kind of including those startups, you'd really be missing an important piece of kind of just the innovation curve, if you will. So, we certainly embrace that and look at how we can work with folks in that regard. One other comment just to play off of that. In terms of the public-private partnerships, Ford sells a lot of vehicles to public entities, whether it's pickups, vans, those sorts of police, those sorts of things. And so, not only does that, as that shift moves to EVs, that gives kind of the potential for an additional playground there, where you've now got assets that were purchased by a public entity to do a specific job. How else can you utilize that in testing different hypotheses or that sort of thing. So I just wanted to make sure, make that comment as well.
That's great. No, thanks for that. So John, I'm going to give you the last word from the perspective of a founder. Final comments. Why are you in this space? Why do you care? And what is your what is the hope here of the future when we're talking about energy?
I'm in this space because a couple of years ago when I met my partner who founded the company, I was at a point where I really had to decide if I was going to take a risk, and I was kind of all set to go into solar. I was going to move out to San Francisco and do solar, and I was really excited about that. And then I met this this crazy brilliant University of Virginia professor who had this idea of storing wind and solar energy in EVs, and well, it was just too interesting. And I think that's kind of the role that startups play. It's not the idea that we're suddenly the innovation. There are tons of people at Ford and Verizon and every other company that have brilliant ideas. But what's nice about startups is we have permission to take the risks. We have permission to fail. That's why most startups fail, unfortunately, but it's because we have permission from the market, from society, to take those crazy risks, like starting a vehicle to grid company, almost 10 years ago. That's risky, but that's the role I think startups provide, is that fertile ground to do that. And if you can, pick something that, for me personally, the reason why I'm doing this is for three things. One, it might turn out to pay the bills for me. That's important for my family. That's great. The second is it's really fun. Every day I love going to work, to solve this really interesting problem in this unique way. So it's fun, it pays the bills. But the third thing, the trifecta, is that it has that spiritual need, like it fulfills that purpose. Like I feel every day it's worth doing. And most people in their careers, I think, across the world don't get to do any of those things, unfortunately. If you can get like 2 out of 3, wow, you are like 99%. If you can hit all 3, man, like that's the secret of life. So that's kind of why I'm personally doing this.
Amazing. Well, thank you for the great conversation today. I don't think we solved everything, but it's really inspiring, all the work you're doing. You guys are all working on things that are hugely impactful and important for where this world is going. And so I appreciate the time, and it's a pleasure working with all of you just through our programs at New Lab as well. So thank you again, and thank you to the audience for participating. It's very active conversations on the questions as well. Until next time, thank you guys.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye.